Hi guys, and welcome back. So today we are going to learn how to make a sock on the loom. I'm going to show you the Kitchener cast on to do your toe shaping. I'm going to show you how to do your heel shaping and all the other good parts of the sock. This particular sock is being done on a 56 peg loom by KB Looms. For the demonstration of this sock, I will be using the 64 peg loom, which is considered the his loom, but it's also an average adult size sock. The sock looms come in a container much like this one. You get the hers and the his set. And like I said, they are by KB Looms. You can get these at some big box stores. Hobby Lobby, Joann's. You can also get them on Amazon, and you can get them from kblooms.com. Something else that you're going to need in order to successfully work this pattern is you're going to need some type of stitch markers. I just happened to get these at KB Looms because I like the way they're made. You can definitely use the little rubber bands from the Dollar Tree or anything that you have already on hand to mark your loom. You're also going to need some kind of loom hook. Typically, all these looms do come with their own hooks. I just prefer the ergonomic ones. So, this is what we're gonna need. I am going to show you how to mark the loom for the 64 peg loom. After that, I'm going to insert a little clip that shows you how to do the Kitchener cast on, and it is on the 56 peg loom. So that way, if you decide that you want to use the 56 peg loom instead of the 64, you will already, with that video, will know how to mark that loom as well. So, I have my stitch marker here at one end, which is blue. Directly across from that, I have my kind of neon yellow one. And that is just dividing the loom in half so that I can do my short row shapings. I have, counting the end stitch, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 on this side. I have 11 on this side. And then I have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11 in the middle. So, what we're going to do, and don't worry, I will go into more detail when we get to this point, but we're going to be working back and forth, wrapping and turning each one of these pegs until there's 2 loops on each of these pegs, from this stitch marker to this stitch marker, and this stitch marker to this one. Then once we get that completed, then we'll start our increasing, and we'll work back and forth until we've worked all those loops back off. But anyway, I'm going to go ahead and insert that clip right here that shows you how to do the Kitchener cast on. Like I said, the only difference is the amount of pegs. If you're going to use this one, mark the loom, like I said, for this one. If you're going to use the 56 peg loom, then mark the loom the way that I did in this clip. Hi guys, and welcome to the Lopsided Crafter. My name is Erica, and today I am going to show you how to do the Kitchener cast on so that you can do toe up socks on the loom. Let's get started. Hi guys, and welcome back. So in this demonstration, we will be using Perfect Pair by Loops and Threads of Michaels. This particular color is Pink Cadillac, 454 yards, 3.5 ounces, 415 meters, or 100 grams. It is a super fine fingering weight yarn. It is 70% acrylic, 23% viscose from bamboo, and 7% polyester. We're going to be using the 56 peg loom from KB Looms. This comes in the his and her set. KB Looms, 56 pegs. Now, with the Kitchener cast on, what you want to do is determine which way you feel more comfortable working on the loom, and that is how you will start. But before we do that, you need to think about marking your loom. This particular loom, I have one blue stitch marker and 3 purple markers. And the reason why I have those, there is no specifically marked first peg on the KB looms, at least on this particular loom. So I have one peg marked with a blue marker. The one directly across from it has a purple marker, just to show me that that is the loom divided in half. These 2 purple markers are for my short row shaping for my toes and heels. This particular loom does not divide evenly over 3, because this is half and then this is a third. So there is 10 pegs here, 10 pegs here, and 9 pegs here. And that is how I have my loom marked to do the short row shapings for my toes and heels. Okay. It is definitely something that you want to consider doing before you cast on to the loom, because it's a lot easier to put these markers on before you start than trying to figure out how to do it after you start. Trust me. Even if you're not doing a sock pattern, it's always a good idea, if you can, to mark out your loom as far as stitch repeats and things to that nature. Okay, so let's get started. From here, what you need to decide is how you work around the loom. I'm going to move it this way because this is actually my starting peg. Do you like to work clockwise, or do you like to work counterclockwise? That is completely a personal preference. I am ambidextrous and can work both ways, but I find it much more comfortable to do my purls working in the clockwise fashion. Okay, so having said that, right-handed people typically work more comfortably clockwise, while left-handed people typically work better counterclockwise. Again, that is not set in stone. That is completely your preference. So, to do the Kitchener cast on, we are actually going to put our working yarn at the opposite end of our starting peg, so that way when we cast on, our yarn will be down here to start our sock, or whatever you're using the Kitchener cast on for. This Kitchener cast on can be used for socks, for hats, anything that has any kind of shaping that you want. I personally only use it for socks. But again, personal preference. So the first thing we're going to do is put our working yarn on the loom. Because I am right-handed, my tail is going to be towards my right. And my working yarn is on the left side of this peg. Okay, I'm going to zoom in a little bit so you can see exactly what I'm getting ready to do. I'm just going to kind of hold this tail with the loom until I get it casted on a little bit. I'm going to pick up this working yarn. And I'm going to take it behind that first peg and in between the peg and the peg next to it. So that way the yarn is wrapping around the front of that following peg. I'm going to go behind and do the same thing over here. I'm going between that first peg and the second peg to wrap the yarn around the front. And I'm going to continue to do that, going between those pegs and wrapping around the front of the next peg all the way across and down the loom. Now, you don't want this to be extremely tight, but you do want it to be taut. You also have to make sure that when you're doing this, that you get each peg. You don't want to do something like this where you get 2 pegs. You want to make sure that you're only getting 1. You also want to make sure that you're not skipping a peg, because all of this will matter when you get down to the other end of the loom, as well as when you actually start your rounds. Okay, so you can let go of that tail now. Okay, so we're getting down here towards the end. You want to make sure that you get every peg. Every peg down here, because it is easy to miss one. Okay, so I'm down here. I've got this peg wrapped. I'm going behind here and I'm going to wrap this peg. So now I've got my yarn behind this peg, and I've got this peg and this peg. Neither one of those have a loop on it. So I'm going to wrap this peg. Okay. Make sure that working yarn goes behind that very last peg. And then you're going to bring it around towards the front. So now my yarn is going in the direction that is comfortable for me. Okay. From there, I just kind of push those down a little bit. You grab your loom tool. I'll show you how to do a few stitches just so you know how to get started. I'm going to be doing the regular flat stitch, so I just kind of hold that yarn over there, pick up a loop, and pop it over. Now you want to be very careful doing this, because like I said, if one of these pops off, the whole thing is going to come unraveled. So once I get about 3 or 4 on there, then I find it easier to just do it this way, and I just kind of hold my finger back here on those loops just to kind of keep them secure, so that way they don't pop off. Okay, and you do that all the way around the loom. And when you get back to your very first marked peg, the peg right before it, when you get back to this peg right here, you have done your first round and you have done the Kitchener pattern. Okay, so you should now have a loop on every peg all the way around your loom. If you are right-handed, your yarn will be going towards the left of the loom. clockwise, left-handed, your yarn will be going towards the right of the loom, which is counterclockwise. Okay, so from here, I just kind of push these stitches down just a little bit. You don't want them to go all the way to the bottom of the peg, but just enough to where you can actually put your working yarn on top. Now, as I mentioned in that clip, you definitely want to be careful the first couple rounds after you do the cast on, because if one of these loops pops off, the whole thing unravels. So just be mindful of that and be extra careful on the first couple rounds. So what we are going to do now is our first round of the Kitchener cast on. Our yarn is wrapped around our working peg. We are going to go to our next stitch. We're going to put our working yarn above the loop that is on the peg. We're going to pick that loop up and we are going to scoop it over the top of that working yarn. I'm going to do that again for you because I just noticed it was out of the camera. Our working yarn is across the top of our peg. We're going to pick that loop up ever so gently and just pop it over the top. Again, working yarn on the top, loop over the top of the peg. And we're going to do that all the way around the loom. Being, like I said, careful not to lose one of these loops, because then you'll have to restart. Okay, so continue doing that all the way around the loom until you get to the peg before your marked peg, and then I'll meet you back. I wanted to pop in real quick because I did have a loop pop off, so I want to see if you guys can see this. You see that loop right here? That actually popped off, and it did it in a way that I'm actually going to be able to save it. As long as I don't pull too tight. Can grab that loop with my hook and bring it back ever so gently and pop it back on the loom. I was able to save it. Okay, so by now, you should have knitted all the way around the loom to the peg before your marked peg for the beginning of your round. If you are right-handed, your working yarn is going to be on this side of your marked peg, and if you're left-handed, it's going to be on this side. From here, what we're going to do, now this step is optional, but I do highly, highly recommend that you do this. It's just going to make your life easier when you are closing up the cast on later. Just take you a piece of contrasting yarn, lay it right here in the middle of your loom. And what you want to do is kind of bring the yarn through that gap underneath the stitches that you've already casted on. You can do that with a crochet hook. You can do it with your loom hook. You just kind of got to finagle it to get it through that space. All right, so once you get that through, I just kind of flip my loom upside down and tie it in a bow, so that way I can reuse it, and also the bow is just kind of keeps it up here out of the way. All right, so now what we are going to do from here is we are going to go around the loom again one more time so that we will have 2 rounds of knit stitches on here, which will secure our Kitchener cast on. So go ahead and knit all the way around one more time until the peg right before your starting peg, and we will join back up. But before I go, let me just mention, because you did just put this waste yarn on top of your working yarn, that is fine. Just kind of bring it around the front. It doesn't matter if the waste yarn is on top of the working yarn or not. It's not gonna affect your stitches. You could always move it in between the stitches before you put on your yarn. It doesn't matter. It's not gonna affect what's going on at this point. So go ahead, knit all the way around back to the peg before your marked peg at the beginning of the round, and I will show you what we're gonna do next. Okay, if you have made it all the way back around to the peg before your marked peg, congratulations. You have officially secured your Kitchener cast on. Now, from here, what we're gonna do is start our short row shaping for our toe. For right-handed, we are going to start, we're gonna knit all the way from our beginning of round marked peg all the way over to our halfway point peg, the one right before it. When we get to this peg, I'm going to show you how to do the wrap and turn. If you're on left-handed, your stitch markers should be on the opposite side, which in that case you would be knitting all the way to this peg. And if they're not, that's okay. If you have not, if you're left-handed and you have not put them on the side, then you can just work it the opposite way. Just knit all the way over to this peg and then start your short row shapings, meaning you would knit all the way around actually to your first beginning peg, and then we were just going to knit back and forth. It may be a little awkward for you being left-handed, but I promise it's going to do the same thing. So what we're going to do now is we are going to knit all the way back to the opposite side of our loom to the peg right before our marked peg. You don't have to hold your yarn really tight. You just kind of want to hold it taut. If you hold it too tight, especially when you're doing socks, you have the chance of taking the stretch out of the yarn, and you definitely don't want to do that, because you want that bounce back that the sock yarn gives you. Because when you knit socks, you actually knit them with negative ease. so that way they actually stretch to form to your foot and they don't, you know, slouch down and fall off as you walk or fall off in your shoe, that kind of thing. So we're almost around to this peg. Once you guys get the hang of it, you'll definitely be able to go a lot faster, and you'll find your rhythm and a good way to hold your loom. I don't normally hold my loom like this when I am knitting a sock, but in order to get a good tutorial for you guys, I'm having to adapt a little bit of how I would normally work. So hopefully this all stays in camera view for you and you can see what I'm doing. Okay, so we're gonna knit this last peg before our marked peg. Now this peg does have the tail coming from it, so we need to be a little extra careful with this peg for the first couple of rounds, even after the short row shapings, because you don't want this tail to pop off, because right now you can kind of lift it and it will come right out, and if you do, then you'll actually lose a stitch and everything won't be even. So kind of just hold that off to the side if you can. You're going to bring your working yarn between the peg that you just worked and the next peg, and this is going to be the same way for all of these pegs that you're going to wrap. You're going to pick that loop up with your loom hook going down from the top, lift that off and kind of hold it to the back. You're going to take that working yarn, and what we're going to do is we're going to put it between the peg and that loop, so that way the yarn is wrapped behind that peg. And we're going to pop that loop back on. So now we have wrapped it. Now we're going to turn it by just going back and knitting in the opposite direction. Sometimes you gotta finagle that first one right there, because you know you've got your two loops and the yarn's not really wanting to go where it's supposed to. So now we're gonna knit all the way back to the other side, and we're gonna wrap and turn our peg that is marked as the beginning of our round. You would do the same thing if you are left-handed. You're just going in the opposite direction. Again, you don't want to do this too tight. You just kind of want your yarn to lay on there. Let your fingers just kind of loosely hold the yarn, especially with the sock yarn. Okay, knit all the way back until the peg before your next marked peg, and we'll wrap and turn again. Okay, we've knit all the way back around to the peg before our marker that marks the beginning of our round. We're going to do the same thing we did on the other side. We're going to bring that working yarn in between those two pegs. We're going to take our loom tool. We're going to pop that loop off, making sure that you grab all the strands. Put that working yarn behind that peg and in between that loop. Pop that loop back on, and now it is securely wrapped around the peg. Now we're gonna go back and do the same thing But this time, we're gonna stop one before the two. So, what I mean by that is, we're gonna knit all the way back to this peg. We're gonna wrap and turn this peg. Then we're gonna go back in this direction. We'll wrap and turn this one. Then we'll go back and wrap and turn the next one. We're gonna keep going back and forth, wrapping and turning each peg until you have 2 loops from this marked peg to this marked peg and this marked peg to this one. So continue working on those wraps and turns, and I will show you what to do next. Okay, so we're almost back here to our other side, and I just wanted to show you again how to do that wrap and turn. So I know that this is my last knit stitch because this one has 2 on it. So I know I need to wrap and turn that next peg. So I'm gonna bring that working yarn in between those 2 pegs, pop that loop off, bring that working yarn behind, and pop that loop back on the peg. And then we're gonna knit back this way. And a way to know if you lay your loom down and you're in the middle of your decreases or your increases, a good way to know which direction, like say you're over here in the middle somewhere, a good way to know which direction you're going is to count. So say I stop right here on this round. I can look back in here and say, oh, you know what? I've got 2 loops right here that are wrapped, and I've only got 1 on this side, so I know I'm going in this direction. And the same thing goes for the increases in back. You just count to see which side has more or less, and that will help you determine which direction you are going when you're doing your short row shapings. So continue to do that until you have 2 loops from here to here and from here to here, and then I will show you how to do the increases. Okay, so I have wrapped my last peg, and a good way to verify, just to make sure before you go any further, is that you have 2 loops on each peg from here to this marked stitch and from here to this marked stitch. And you know this last one is ready because the yarn is going in the opposite direction. Now, right now, you should have some kind of like half crescent shaped right there. So now we're going to start the increases, which is going to be the exact opposite of what we just did. So now we are going to knit back to our first peg that has 2 loops on it. Again, right at this point, you still don't need to be holding the yarn too tight. You just want it to be taut. And like I said, you'll find a rhythm which works best for you. Once you get the hang of it, you'll be flying through these socks in no time. All right, 2 more to go. 1 and 2. Okay, so our next peg right here has 2 loops on the hook. We've got 1 and 2. So what we are going to do is we're going to take that yarn, we're going to bring it to the front, we're going to wrap it around that peg and go back this direction, okay? So the yarn is now going back in the opposite direction, and we're going to treat those 2 loops that are on that peg as one. And we are just going to pop those over. Now, sometimes if it's really tight, you may have to do 1 loop at a time. And if you have to do that, that is completely fine. Now, this is the only time that you'll want to make sure that you pull it tight. Because when you pull it tight, those little stitches kind of move over here to the side, and that will cut down on any holes in your short row shaping, okay? So from here, we are going to knit back in the opposite direction, because now we're increasing. And this next one is going to be a little tighter because we did pull this one a little bit tight. Sorry, I got out of the camera there. So we're just going to knit back. I'm trying to go a lot slower than I normally would so that I can show you guys exactly what to do. I'm sorry, I keep sliding out of the camera there. Let me back this out a little bit so I can stay in camera for you guys. Now see, if you pull these stitches too tight, it's going to be harder for you to knit them off. So you definitely just want to kind of guide that yarn over the top. All right. So that stitch almost slipped off. I was able to save it. I don't know if you caught that or not. All right, so we're back to our March peg. That's the first one that has the 2 loops on it. Again, we're going to take it from the front, wrap it around the back, knit those 2 loops off. Okay, so I want to show you a little closer of what happens when you actually pull that stitch. So you see the yarn right now. Watch what happens when I pull that stitch tight. You see how it kind of turns around over here to the front? That's exactly what you want it to do. So now you're just going to knit back until your next one that has 2 loops on it. Wrap and turn, wrap and turn, wrap and turn, so all the way back and forth until you have worked all of the 2 loops off of your loom. And when you do that, we will be back to do the next part. All right, guys, I just wanted to pop back in and check on you. You should be doing your increases, working back and forth now to the first peg that has your 2 loops on it and going back and forth. Back and forth. The inside will start to look like this. As you can see, it's starting to do like a little divot here. And once you start going all the way around, that will be your actual spot that your toes go in. Welcome back. If you're still with me, congratulations. You have done your toe short row shaping. Now, for me, the last loop 2 loops that I worked off was the beginning peg. If your last 2 loops worked off was on the opposite end, that is completely fine. You would just work back around the opposite side until you get to the beginning row. It's fine. It really doesn't matter which side you're on as far as when you end, as long as you get back to your beginning peg. So this is kind of what your toe's gonna look like. And you've got all this kind of hairy looking stuff going on right now. Don't worry about that. We're gonna close that area up once the sock is a little bit longer. So from here, we are going to just start knitting all the way around and around and around and around. Right now, you can tell by looking at these stitches that you have 2 rounds on the loom. You have 1, and then the one above it is 2. That's how you count. We are gonna go around again a couple more times until we have a total of 5 on this side. Once we have 5 rounds complete, then your toe is actually complete. From there, that is when we will start counting the rounds for the body of our foot. Now, I am going to insert a picture of some measurements, as well as have it linked to my blog, and the link for that will be below. This is just going to be a guidance. Now, remember that you want to have negative ease for your socks, so you don't want to exactly get the same measurement. I will also show you in a couple rounds how we are going to actually measure our toe, okay? So it'll give you an idea of when you need to stop, because the measurement of your toe is going to be the exact same measurement of the heel, and that'll kind of give you an idea of how many rounds you need to do to complete the body. I suggest that you write this down somewhere, especially if you're going to be using the same loom and the same type of yarn, so that way the next time you know, okay, I do 65 rounds and then I start my heel, or something to that effect. Again, for this demonstration, I am using the Loops and Threads Perfect Pair. This does not have wool in it. So I will be doing quite a few more rounds for the body than I normally would if I was using a wool nylon blend. So keep that in mind as well as you're working on your sock. If you think socks are something that you are going to enjoy doing, I would suggest getting some type of sock ruler. This has the women's sizes, US sizes here on the side. And it has the men's sizes here in the middle. And then it has the European sizes over here. So basically what you would do is kind of put the ruler inside, which, like I said, right now it's kind of hard to determine, because until you get these 5 rows over here, you really are not going to have a measurement of what your true sock is going to be as far as the toe. So just continue working around and around for several rows. Remember to start counting once you have 5 rounds on this side. Okay, I do want to show you this. When you get back to the opposite side of your short row shapings and you start working these stitches off, these stitches are going to do something funky. You see how they're kind of rolling up here? That is perfectly normal. That is going to do that until you get a couple more rounds on. And once you get down to the 5th round, you can kind of come down here on the inside and slightly tug to it, and those stitches right there will kind of just roll back in place. So if that starts happening on these rounds, these first couple rounds after your toe, don't get worried. That is completely normal. Okay, so I have done my 5 rounds. And it looks a little funky right now with all these stitches rolled up. And that's what I was talking about in the last little bit of the tutorial. So what you want to do is just come in here and just kind of lightly pull, and it'll bring those stitches down where they need to be. Now you don't want to tug, but just kind of pull to them a little bit, and you can kind of feel them roll over, if you will. See, so now they all look normal. So once you have all of those done, you've done your 5 rounds, your toe is officially done. And like I said, we will do something with this part later. From here, you are just going to start knitting in the round, and this is where you will start your counting. So for me, with this particular yarn and my size foot, I normally wear between a 7 and a 7.5 women's shoe, US size. With this particular yarn, I'm going to knit 75 rounds before I get to the heel. Normally with a wool blend, I do 65 rounds. Again, like I said, look at that chart to kind of give you an idea, and definitely please make sure that you write down the rounds that you do so that you will be able to make your matching sock. Once we have some more rounds on and this thing is kind of hanging down, we'll be able to get an accurate measurement of how much we actually use for our toe. It looks like it's going to be about 1.5 inches, which is about normal. 1.5 to 2 inches depending on your yarn. You could really, if you wanted to, fold it up and kind of do it right now. Yeah, again, it's going to be about 1.5 inches. So how you do this from here. Say that your foot length based on your size is 6.5 inches. We know that we already have 1.5 inches here, okay? So then that leaves us 5 inches left to play with. Well, we've got to remember that we're going to need another 1.5 inches to do the heel. So that means that you would do your rounds until you have 1.5 inches less than your actual foot length. Then you would start your heel shaping. So Continue to work in the round until you get the body of your sock made. And then I will show you how to do the heel shaping, which you are going to be able to do because it is the exact same that we did for the toe.